so we'll start. Hopefully everybody's here, so will you show everybody being present? And before we begin, we have some more of our leadership development program people here, sitting here on the front row. And I bet you guys stand up and introduce yourself. Tell us where you work. We'd like to hear from you.
Roy Breeden. I work at System Operations, Electrical Substations.
Tell us how long you've been with KUB, too.
20 years.
Great.
Michael Love, I'm in overhead construction. I'm a lineman. I've been at KUB 3.5 years.
I'm Billy Jo McCarley, and I work with the engineering department, help manage capital plant improvement projects, and I've been with KUB for 11 years.
I'm Kurt Stafford, and I've been with KUB for 7 years, and I'm a team leader in the water drinking group.
Eric Green, I've been here almost 18 years, and I work at KUB's Smart Grid project.
I'm Liz Hanna. I'm with the Vegetation Management Program, and I've been with KUB for 7 years.
Yeah, we give you double time for some. Well, we're glad that you all are here. This is a test. If you can sit through one of these meetings, you can do anything. So we're glad that you're here, and hope you enjoy being part of this. First thing we need to do is approve the minutes. They were emailed to everybody. Is there a motion regarding the minutes?
So
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? And the first order of business is Resolution 1308 and 1309. I understand we're going to take up both of those at the same time, but we'll have to vote on them separately.
Yes, Commissioners. Jamie Davis will be recognized. He's going to review each of these for you, and it'll be a joint presentation, but at the end, the General Counsel will have a roll call vote on each resolution.
Thank you, Ms. Roach. Commissioners, again, for your consideration today, Resolutions 1308, 1309, which requests the board consider additional budget appropriation as well as additional commitment appropriations for fiscal year 14. Of note, these amounts and our proposal have been reviewed by the board's audit committee at the most recent audit committee meeting. Prior to your consideration, I'd like to review the justification for our request today. If we take a look at fiscal year 14, where we stand today, where we forecast to be by the end of the year, all in all, pretty good budget year in our 4 operating divisions. Net O&M is going to project to be right around $2.1 million under budget. There are a lot of puts and takes as to why that is, but predominantly from labor and benefit-related expenses, as we had planned earlier when we proposed our FY14 budget. Even though it's warmed up recently, in the not-too-distant past was a very cold winter, and we've talked a lot about that. And as such, energy purchases were up significantly in our electric and natural gas divisions in order to meet that customer demand. As well, in this fiscal year, we have issued 2 sets of bonds, both for our gas and water divisions. We initially planned this to be in the November timeframe. We accelerated that up to around August. As such, we had to have some debt service payments that we hadn't anticipated as we prepared the budget for last year, and created a variance there. Where that leaves us is approximately $11.8 million over budget, about 1.4% of the original appropriated budget of $852 million. So as we are coming today, Mr. Walker will here in a minute, seek approval for an appropriated budget for FY15. This time last year, you all appropriated a budget of $852 million. When we have to go over that budget as required by charter, you have to appropriate those additional funds, and thus the request for today. We are requesting additional funds in our electric, natural gas, and water divisions for the areas mentioned above. And on the flip side of the financial house, the revenues net across those 4 divisions, again, are up $12.7 million as well, again, because of a colder winter. As we look at detail into the expenditures that make us provide for this request today, again, you'll notice on the top line here, our energy purchase is approximately $6.3 million over in electric, approximately $10.3 million over in gas, again, a function of that colder winter. If you'll notice on the debt service line, those 2 expedited debt issues there have created that variance for a total variance of $11.8 million. Again, our request today driven predominantly by the additional energy purchases and the timing of those debt issues.
Let me add to that. The timing of the debt issues were driven by taking advantage of a better bond market, not that we had to have the money 2 months earlier. We were able to save some money by going a little earlier because the market was on the rise.
Again, on the flip side, on the revenue, again, you'll notice sales revenue on the top line, as referenced by a strong winter there with electric and gas. Electric was offset somewhat by 2 reasons, one of which was an over-recovery from prior fiscal year of revenue, and so we flowed that back to our customers through our purchase power adjustment, as well as a milder winter as we came in, or excuse me, milder summer as we came into fiscal year 14, and so offset some of our revenue there as well. And you'll also notice the decline that we've discussed with you as recently as last month at our May meeting with the continued decline in its consumption for water and wastewater. This budget did not take into consideration that 1% decline that we'd seen occurring, so thus the negative variance there. So where that leads us, as you can see, Resolution 1293, which was approved last year at this time for a budget of $851.9 million, was approved. We again are requesting as part of Resolution 1308, $10 million for electric, $10 million for gas, and $1 million for water, which would raise our FY14 total approved budget to $872.9 million. Any question on budget appropriations? Okay, as we switch gears to commitment appropriations, commitment appropriations are the amounts that this board approves that allows us to commit to spend, not to spend, not the authorization to spend, but to commit to spend monies beyond the fiscal year budget. So this time last year, you approved approximately $58.6 million for us to commit to expend beyond FY14 monies. Where we sit today, we need additional commitment authority in our electric and wastewater divisions. Historically, and in this case too, these are generally for our capital projects, where they may be at the end, the timing of such may be at the end of a fiscal year. Our commitment to start may be near the end of a fiscal year or may span a fiscal year, and thus that's kind of the reason we're here today. Those timing of contracts really do drive the need for this additional authority to commit to spend. In our electric division, with the request that we're making today, would raise our total commitment authority as approved by the board to $18.1 million for fiscal year 14. And that's primarily driven by our 2 new substations, our East Knox substation, our Cherokee Trail substation, as well as additional ongoing 69 kV line improvements, all of which are part of our Century 2 program. And in our wastewater division, that would raise our total commitment authority to $25 million. Again, various amounts of improvements going on as part of our PACE 10 program, but primarily driven by improvements at the plant and inside the collection system. If you take a look at that in a detailed manner here, again, you can see the $58 million, or $59 million nearly, that was approved as part of Resolution 1294 at this time last year. Again, we're requesting an additional 4.2 in the electric division and 10.1 in the wastewater division, raising our total commitment appropriations to approximately $72.8 million.
Is that 14 million sort of in line with past years? I mean, is that a fairly...
It'll ebb and flow depending on what projects are coming along. For this fiscal year, I'm not sure how much we have for FY15 proposed, that you'll hear Bill about in a minute. I'm not sure exactly, but we can check on that.
It's typical when we come back this time of year and review budget appropriations that we need additional commitment authority. When you're setting that this time for next year, there's going to be obviously puts and takes, and some new projects may come on the horizon. So it's not, I'd say it's consistent with that.
Any other questions?
So the resolution before you, 1308, would adopt additional budget appropriations of $21 million for FY14 and $10 million in electric, 10 in gas, $1 million in water, raising the entire approved and appropriated budget for FY14 from $851.8 to $872.8.
Okay. Are there any questions? Is there a motion? We got to vote on these separately, so let's take up Resolution 1308 first. Is there a motion regarding Resolution 1308?
So moved. Second.
Any discussion? Mr. Kohler?
Commissioner Anderson.
Aye.
Commissioner Cannell. Commissioner Hamilton,
Aye.
Commissioner Herbert,
Aye.
Commissioner Pennell,
Aye.
Commissioner Thompson,
Aye.
Commissioner Williams.
Aye.
Resolution 1308 has passed.
Thank you, and we'll take up 1309, motion regarding 1309.
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion? Mr. Coe?
Commissioner Anderson,
Aye.
Commissioner Cannell, Commissioner Hamilton,
Aye.
Commissioner Herbert,
Aye.
Commissioner Pennell,
Aye.
Commissioner Thompson,
Aye.
Mr. Williams.
Aye.
Resolution 1309 has passed.
Correct. Now, we will take up, 2 more motions, 3 more motions, 5 more motions. Several.
As a way of introduction to the matters that are going to come before you now, there are 5 resolutions that relate to our budget and funding that budget. But let me take you back in time a little bit. We started this process with the division reports throughout the year, and then last month at the April meeting, as you'll recall, we spent about 4 hours going through this in detail. We got your input, we factored that in, and a couple of things that you suggested is that we try very hard to let the public know about what we were doing. So I hope you've seen the links that we've sent that have media articles where we've done that. Additionally, we prepared this as an executive summary. It's the first time we've done this, but you all suggested that we needed to put on our website the basics of the budget and the 5-year plan and the 10-year plan and what we were doing with Century 2 and PACE 10. So these were provided to you with your notebooks. This is now on the front page of our website, and we're hoping that the customers will look at it because they can see not only the money that you all will be appropriating today, but how that money is going to be spent throughout the plan. So with that introduction, I'll recognize Mark Walker to provide a summary of what you all have spent many hours on already.
Commissioners, today we do submit for your consideration the proposed budget for fiscal year 2015. We also present for your consideration debt and rate increases that will help fund the fiscal year 2015 budget and even fund beyond the fiscal year 2015 budget with respect to the rates. And I'll point out that each of the rate increases we'll talk about and the debt as well are consistent with the long-term funding plans that have previously been endorsed by the board through resolution. So we'll start out with just a quick overview of the FY15 budget. $868 million in total that will provide for the capital and maintenance expenditures that will keep all of our Century 2 infrastructure programs on track. And I think also we feel that it is a budget that will support our long-term vision that we talked a lot about last month of providing to our customers utility services that are reliable, affordable, and safe. And it does include what we'll talk about today, the funding recommendations for the debt and the rates. And they're part of long-term balanced funding plans. And we use appropriate levels of debt that spread the cost of those capital programs over both current and future customers. And by so doing that, these balanced funding plans are intended to keep our rates affordable both for our current and future customers as well. So high-level overview. The budget itself, again, $868 million. In Resolution 1313, here in a few minutes, we'll look at specifically, the board will be approving an appropriation for each of the 4 divisions that is required by the charter. The $868 million is broken down for electric, $570 million, gas, $127 million, water, $63 million, and wastewater, $107 million, again, for a total of $868. Looking at the major cost components of the budget, spend a few minutes going through some of the detail. Wholesale energy is always the biggest component of our budgets. Next fiscal year is no exception, 55% of the total budget at $473 million. And this represents the cost of electric power that we'll purchase from TVA to meet the needs of our about 200,000 electric system customers next year. And it also includes $61 million in wholesale gas costs. That's what we'll pay the pipelines to transport and store the gas in the off-peak season. And that's what we'll buy for, also represents the quantity we'll buy from multiple gas suppliers to bring to Knoxville to sell to our customers. So $473 million total wholesale energy. Our O&M budget at $132 million. And O&M essentially, I think you can say it is the dollars that we have to operate, maintain, and support our 4 utility systems. And as typically the case, 47%, close to 50% is going to be labor-related expenditures. We're going to have a full-time staff next year. We're funding a full-time staff of about 925 employees. And a good portion of their pay goes to O&M to help support work on our utility systems. $42 million of the budget goes for payroll. Another $10 million is for the medical benefits for those full-time employees as well. And then we have $10 million budgeted for post-employment benefits. $6 million of that is for our required contribution to our pension trust fund, which is determined through actuarial valuations. And we talked about that last month as well. Other major drivers of the O&M budget, I'll just go through a few of them. Vegetation management, which is obviously very critical to our reliability program for our electric system. We spend $7 million a year on that program. We'll spend $3.5 million for our contract meter reader to go out and read the meters each month. And that, of course, is AccuRead, our new contractor for that. We'll also spend $4 million on our regular PACE 10 utility system maintenance program for our wastewater collection system. A couple of other large items, utility expense. We'll spend about $8 million in utilities. The most of that is for electric power to make the energy required by our water and wastewater treatment facilities and our pump stations. They can take a decent amount of electric power to generate to work. And then we'll spend about $2 million on chemicals to treat our water and wastewater plants. So again, O&M, I know it's a lot of numbers and there's labor costs associated with that. That's really what helps us operate and maintain, of course, like it says, our utility systems. Our capital budget, it will, like we said earlier, keep our Century 2 programs on track. Its total capital budget, $168 million next fiscal year. About $140 million of that is directly related to Century 2. If you break it down by utility systems, $168 million, $69 million electric, $40 million wastewater, $32 million gas, $27 million water. Some of the more noteworthy projects, we've talked a lot about the South Loop gas project. It's a total $23 million multi-year project. We'll spend about 60% of that next fiscal year. A lot of the work will be done on the actual installation of the gas project, of the gas line next fiscal year. It has a slated completion date of October 31st, 2015. So a lot of work will be done on that next fiscal year. We talked about this last month as well. We have 2 major substation projects as far as new substations that are in the FY15 budget. Cherokee Trail, which will provide power to the new Cherokee Farms campus, and also a new in-feed substation out in East Knoxville. That'll be a new delivery point from TVA. That's a big part of the capital budget as well. As far as our regular infrastructure replacement programs, $8 million to replace 2,500 poles, $12 million for 19 miles of overhead line improvements, and that's both transmission and distribution line improvements. As far as our main replacement programs, $9 million for the replacement of 20 miles of water main next year, and that'll continue to remove cast iron and galvanize from the system. 12 miles of galvanized keeps us on track to have all of that type of main out by 2020, which is our target date. For a gas system, 11 miles of main replacement at $7 million. Again, we have a long-term cast iron removal program for the gas system. All of that will be out by December of 2015. This budget keeps that on track as well. And then for wastewater, $28 million to do our regular 25 miles of main replacement for wastewater, which will continue on and on into the future. It's 1% of the main in our wastewater system. So that's capital at $168 million. Our debt service budget represents the principal and interest that we'll repay on our debt next fiscal year. And when we end this fiscal year, we'll have $882 million in outstanding bonds across all 4 systems. We propose to issue an additional $78 million next fiscal year. So the P&I that we'll pay down on that debt is $64 million in FY15. And you can see how it breaks down by system, as is typically the case because most of our debt is in wastewater. The largest portion of our debt is in wastewater. 29 million of the 64 million will pay down principal and interest in wastewater. And of the 64 million, 27 million is principal, 37 million is interest. The final major cost component is our in lieu of tax payments and also the labor-related taxes we have to remit to the federal improvements. It's almost all of that at $26 million. That includes $16.1 million to the city, $8.7 million to the county, and $700,000 to other taxing jurisdictions. I'll point out that the in lieu of taxes include the recently announced property tax increase by the city of Knoxville. That increased our budget around $900,000 from what we talked to the board about back in April. And those are the major cost components that make up the $868 million budget. Any questions on it? Okay. How will the budget be funded, specifically by revenues and debt? Our projection is for $761 million in total system revenue in FY15, all four systems combined. Almost all of that, say $4 million, will go to fund the various operating and capital expenditures, including $57 million in capital. The remainder of the $168 million capital budget will be funded by debt and cash on hand, most of that coming from the gas system. We had a $25 million bond issue in gas during the current fiscal year. We don't plan any for next fiscal year. Cash on hand will largely fund the capital program for gas next year. So in total, the $868 million budget, $757 million in system revenue, $78 million in bonds, $33 million in cash on hand will fund the budget. Okay, we'll spend some time talking about our funding recommendations. As I mentioned at the outset, these are part of long-term balanced funding plans. What's going to happen in FY15? We use the debt to spread the cost. We have $78 million in new bonds proposed as part of our long-term funding plan, and this is what it would be for FY15. 40 million electric, 30 million wastewater, 8 million water. As is typically the case this time of year, we request the short-term note for the gas system to have in our toolbox in the event that we need it to draw down on to manage any potential cash shortfalls. We get the majority of our gas revenue during the winter heating season, so potentially you could have a cash shortfall in the fall. We don't really anticipate one this year, but again, it's a tool in the toolbox to have just in case we need it. And then, of course, we are proposing 3 years of rate increases, modest rate increases for all four utility services as well. The next several charts are required to show for the debt management policy the board has adopted. Before you can approve a debt issue, we need to go over the projected debt structure for the issue. So starting out with electric, $40 million in bonds. We will pay it back over a 30-year period, consistent with our funding plan for the electric division. At this time, our projected interest rate is about 4.25%, average rate for the bonds, and that equates to a total interest cost of around $32 million over the life of the debt. We are projected to have a levelized payback structure, and again, paying it back over 30 years as maturities will extend to 2045. With the new issue, the electric division's debt ratio will increase to 40%, and we will pay back about 47% of all electric bonds over the course of the next 10 years. And I show that because our debt management policy has a requirement of how much we pay back in a 10-year period, and so I just want to point out 47% is in compliance. For the wastewater bonds, $30 million for next fiscal year. We'll have a longer maturity. We'll pay it back over 35 years, as we typically go longer on wastewater than we do on the other systems. A projected interest rate of 4.5% translates to total interest cost of about $29 million over the life of the debt. The debt ratio for wastewater we know is higher than the other systems. With this issue, it'll be around 64%, and our goal for the board is to keep it in that 60 to 65% range over the next 10 years. And 24% of total debt for wastewater will be repaid over the next 10 years. For water, $8 million. Like electric, it'll be paid back over 30 years. A projected interest cost of 4.25%. Total interest expense right at $6 million. Increase the debt ratio to 45% and 34% paid back over 10 years. So that's the structure. All of these will be levelized payback structures, and we have some flexibility with that. When we work with our financial advisor, we get closer to the actual sale date. We'll come back and talk to the board if there's any deviation from it. Any question on the bonds? The estimated cost for issuing the debt, you can see our projection for the parties that will help us facilitate the bond sale, Financial Advisor Bond Council. We are projecting that the issuance cost will be $287,000. That's about 4 basis points on the par value of the bonds, which is consistent with past debt transactions. So nothing unusual anticipated in that regard. And then the gas line of credit, again, a standard thing that we bring to the board this time each year. We are requesting an issuance of a revenue anticipation note not to exceed $15 million. We will take bids on that from local banks and only use it if necessary. And I'll point out the reason that we have to come through this every year is under state law, you can only have a 1-year maturity on these revenue anticipation notes. So anything we draw down has to be repaid prior to June 30th. Then we start the cycle all over. Okay, Commissioners, I want to spend some time talking about the proposed rate increases. I know we have talked quite a bit about this. They are consistent with the funding plans the board has previously endorsed. For electric and water, it represents a continuation of those plans endorsed from back in 2011. And for gas and wastewater, it's the plans that were adopted by the board or endorsed by the board this past December. And this chart shows it from an impact on residential monthly bills. But for electric, monthly bill will increase $1 each year for the next 3 years. That will occur in August. So the first one would be in August of 2014. The average monthly bill for a customer using 1,000 kilowatt hours for residential is currently $100. So it'll be $103 by 2017. For water, an increase of $2 on their August 2014 bill, $1 in August 2015, $1 in August 2016. Their current bill is $19. It'll increase $4, so it'll be $23 by 2017. For gas, $1 each year on the November bills. Electric and water will be August. Gas and wastewater is November. So the average monthly bill for gas is currently $57. It'll increase to $60 by 2017. And for wastewater, a $3 increase on the monthly bill over the course of the next 3 years. November 2014, 15, 16 adds $9. Current average residential wastewater bill, $48, will be $57 by 2017. I'll point out that all of these increases, these various dollar amounts, will be applied to the customer charge for residential services. That way we're ensuring that we're going to get this revenue that'll help us to fund our Century 2 programs. We've talked about that several times before. What you don't see here is commercial and industrial. The rate increases will be applied to them as well. It will be a combination of customer charges and usage charges for those. And obviously the impact on the C&I customers will vary depending upon their monthly utility bills. Any questions on that? Yes, ma'am.
Can you remind me the last time rates were raised?
For electric and water, the board adopted 3 years of increases back in August of 2011. So they went into effect over a 3-year period. And the last of those for electric was October of 2013 and January of 2014 for water. So we put those on the annual increase cycle 3 years ago. Gas and wastewater, gas rates were last raised last October, I believe a $3 increase, and wastewater would have been October of 2012. But now we're putting them on the annual increase cycle, just like electric and water. Commissioners, at the outset, we talked about how this budget and funding plan supports our vision. We've talked about a lot of the dollars that we're going to spend, which will help reliability, which will help ensure safe utility systems. The third part of that, and equally important though, is affordability. We want to have services that our customers can afford to pay their bills as well. So we'll take just a moment and look at all 4 services, starting with electric, and show our bill comparison between KUB and the other 8 large, the big 8 for the TVA distributors. That's been our rate comparison group for many years. For residential, and this is for a customer that uses 1,000 kilowatt hours per month, that monthly bill is $100. So you can see of the 8, I guess we're tied for 3rd lowest. And we will add $3 to that over the next 3 years. So in 2017, that will be $103. For non-residential, for commercial, the type customer that we typically show as a comparison is a mid-size electric commercial customer, uses 150,000 kilowatt hours per month. This is like a Kroger or a Target shopping center. You can see that their average monthly bill based upon that usage level is $15,400. So we will add to that about $150 or $50 per year with the increases for electric. So that's just an example of commercial and industrial impact. For water, for residential, it's based upon 3,700 gallons of monthly water usage. That bill is approximately $19 for our residential water customers, and you can see that's tied for second lowest. Our comparison group here is local utility districts and also some regional water distribution companies, including those in Lexington, Birmingham, and Chattanooga. So our comparison is very favorable here. We'll add $4 to that $19 bill, so it'll be $23 3 years out. As we talked about last time, obviously these various companies, electric, gas, water, wastewater, they're going to be to some degree increasing their rates over that period of time as well. For a commercial customer, the comparisons we use is 225,000 gallons of monthly water usage. This would be a large apartment complex as an example. So with a total monthly bill of $945, it will increase to $1,220 approximately over the course of the next 3 years. So about a $280 increase over that period of time. And that's water. Natural gas, residential, monthly bill based upon 48 therms. We have truncated our comparison group here somewhat. We now are only comparing with those companies that have the same interstate pipeline situation. You may recall from last month's presentation, we had different bars and different colors. We've tried to simplify that, and that's what we included in the blue handout that we have as well. So it's more of an apples to apples comparison. It's a little clearer to see. So our monthly bill is $57. You can see how that compares with these other local gas distribution companies that have the same pipeline situation. We're going to add $3 to that over the next 3 years. It will be $60. For our commercial comparison, this is more of a large gas user, say a mid-sized manufacturing firm or maybe an asphalt plant. Their current monthly bill's $26,800. We're going to add about $1,100 to that over the course of the next 3 years. So it'd be just under $28,000 per month for that size customer. And for wastewater, we've talked about many times that the consent decree has certainly impacted the level of our wastewater bills. So our comparison group are other similar sized cities that are under consent decrees for their wastewater systems. That includes Lexington, Nashville, Birmingham, Louisville, Cincinnati, and Atlanta. Our average monthly bill based upon 3,700 gallons of bill usage is $48. And I'll point out here, and we talked about this last month, we know Birmingham is a train wreck and they were in bankruptcy, that the consent decrees can vary for these systems. Ours, I would say, on a per capita basis, we spent a lot of dollars per capita over a short period of time, more so than I would say than several of these other systems. So you might say, well, why are we higher than Louisville? Well, that's part of the reason for that. It's having to spend a lot more in a short period of time on a per capita basis. And that's because you know we've used a lot of debt on wastewaters, but the rates have had to help out on that as well. We'll add $9 over the next 3 years for wastewater, so it'll be $57 in 2017. And for our commercial and industrial, again, based upon the same level of usage.
I'll leave it to finish, but I was just curious about the history of these, if you know that, have they been raising rates steadily? So we would assume that, you know, you're not even comparing 2017, that where would be everybody else is higher, so we're kind of, we'll be saying the same.
I would say so.
Relative to everybody else.
I would say so. And then also, as some of these are we're in various stages of consent decrees, you may see larger increases by some of these over time, so they may catch up to some degree. Birmingham, actually, I found out yesterday, they actually raised their rates, believe it or not, for the first time in like 12 years. I couldn't tell you what the amount is. I think it's maybe $3 or so, but maybe they're on the path to even somewhat from a financial perspective. But on a commercial basis, same as water, the 225,000 gallons, so that would again be the apartment complex. Their current monthly bill around $2,300. It'd be around $2,800 Especially now. As Jamie talked about FY14 commitments, I have a couple of slides for FY15. And specifically what this does is this $64 million that the board would vote to appropriate, that allows us to enter into certain contracts next fiscal year that will cover cash expenditures beyond next fiscal year. And you can see the various amounts by system. And some of the projects, the South Loop project that we've talked about, that's going to cover, like I said, several fiscal years. It'll go into FY16 as well. That's why this is on the list and counts up dollars in the resolution. And we'll have some significant improvements we're going to make to our Lonsdale in-feed electric substation. In FY16, we'll sign the contract for that next fiscal year as well. So that's the commitment appropriations. And that essentially concludes my, yes ma'am.
One question, on the commitment appropriations, for example, the South Loop project,
Yes.
since it was on the current year that we're extending, and it's on next year as well, does that work in such a way that what we extended for the current year are for those contracts that are already signed, and what is in there for next year are for the contracts that expect to be signed in next year?
It's probably all one contract. And what this does is cover an appropriation for the whole period of time. We know it's going to go into, we're going to make payments in FY16 as well, FY15, some was done in FY14. So the commitment appropriations, I think, covers the whole range of years that we're going to spend dollars. So since we already have a contract that says you're going to spend maybe $5 million in FY16, we need to have an appropriation that covers that.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Part of it's for 16, part of it's for 17.
Yeah, what I was trying to figure out is why it's on both lists. So it's, what we're looking at is the total.
The total $23 million, we need to have that covered by an appropriation for what we haven't spent today. The FY15 budget covers part of that, and this covers what will go beyond the FY15 budget.
All right.
It's always confusing. That's why Bill Coley always has loved this. I'm going to let him do this next week.
What'd you do?
It's always his favorite person.
Mark, if I read this right, the total budget, if you add the appropriations that we've already passed in this meeting to last year's budget, it's actually going to be, this year's budget's actually a little smaller.
That's correct, about $4 or $5 million.
So what would your projection of budget commitment for next year, appropriation for next year, where are you going to wind up?
Fair question. My guess is, depending upon, if we assume that gas and electric commodity prices are same as this year's budget, that it might be a little bit lower because you may not have as many special big projects. Like spending a lot of dollars on the 2 substation projects, and in the South Loop, it won't be as much in FY16 as it is in FY15. So capital, that $168 million may be lower in FY16. So it'll be close.
Any other questions?
Thanks, Mark. Is that it?
It is, but I was just going to click as you vote on resolutions so you can see the summary of each resolution.
All right, great. All right, let me remind everybody, what we're doing is a little bit more confusing than our one-time resolutions. This first resolution 1310 involves rate increase, and so today we will vote on that for the first reading, but we will be back in June for the second and final reading. The others, 13, 11, 12, 13, and 14 are just simple votes today and final vote today, so it just requires one vote. So we'll start with Resolution 1310, replacing the existing rate schedules of electric, gas, water, and wastewater divisions. And Mr. Coley, if you'll call the roll. Well, I need a motion. How about a motion?
So moved. Any discussion?
Mr. Coley.
Commissioner Anderson,
Aye.
Commissioner Cannell, Commissioner Hamilton,
Aye.
Commissioner Herbert,
Aye.
Commissioner Pennell,
Aye.
Commissioner Thompson,
Aye.
Commissioner Williams.
Aye.
Resolution 1310 has passed on first reading.
Thank you. Resolution 1311, requesting city council approval of bond issues for the electric, water, and wastewater divisions. Is there a motion regarding 1311?
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion? Mr. Cole?
Commissioner Anderson,
Aye.
Commissioner Canal,
Aye.
Commissioner Hamilton,
Aye.
Commissioner Herbert,
Aye.
Commissioner Pennell,
Aye.
Commissioner Thompson,
Aye.
Commissioner Williams. Resolution 1311 is passed.
Resolution 1312, requesting authorization for a short-term line of credit for the gas division. Is there a motion regarding 1312?
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion? Mr. Cole?
Commissioner Anderson,
Aye.
Commissioner Canal,
Aye.
Commissioner Hamilton,
Aye.
Commissioner Herbert,
Aye.
Commissioner Pennell,
Aye.
Commissioner Thompson,
Aye.
Commissioner Williams. Resolution number 1312 has passed.
Thank you. 1313, requesting approval for the fiscal year 2015 budget appropriations. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion? Mr. Cole?
Commissioner Anderson,
Aye.
Commissioner Canal,
Aye.
Commissioner Hamilton,
Aye.
Commissioner Herbert,
Aye.
Commissioner Pennell,
Aye.
Commissioner Thompson,
Aye.
Commissioner Williams.
Aye.
Resolution 1313 is passed.
And finally, 1314, requesting approval for fiscal year 2015 commitment appropriations. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion? Mr. Cole?
Commissioner Anderson,
Aye.
Commissioner Canal,
Aye.
Commissioner Hamilton,
Aye.
Commissioner Herbert,
Aye.
Commissioner Pennell,
Aye.
Commissioner Thompson,
Aye.
Commissioner Williams.
Aye.
Resolution 1314 is passed.
Good.
Well done, Mr. Chairman.
We have a president's
We have no other
report. Okay. Then, is there any public comment? I see only KUB people. Then we are going to take up a motion to adjourn so that we can discuss a matter involving some pending litigation or potential litigation and with our general counsel. So we will convene in closed executive session immediately following this meeting, though. And following that meeting, then we will have our normal lunch meeting that is open to the public. I want to ask for a motion to adjourn this meeting and go into this executive session. I wanted to thank you guys again, those of you in the leadership development program, and thank you all for all that you do for us, okay? Glad you were here. Is there a motion to adjourn this meeting and go into executive session?
Move for adjournment.
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?